Good evening, and welcome to The Future We Deserve. I'm Tim Waters, and as a volunteer for Longmont Public Media, I host this program. This is the 10th in a series of shows that are really based on a series of interviews that I conducted early in the pandemic. So tonight, in the wrap-up of this series, we're going to have a chance to unpack the concept of new localism. Just a little bit of context here. These conversations are based on aspirations, best hopes of Longmont leaders and residents that I had a chance to interview 15 months ago. All these conversations based on those best hopes. The first one, back in January, we spent some time talking about redefining the role and responsibilities of government. And tonight, we have a chance to talk with some dialed-in, high-profile, extraordinary community leaders in Longmont to get their take on what it looks like when we've actually redefined the role and responsibilities of government. So join me tonight with this group of experts who I'm happy to introduce. Most of you will know who they are, and I'm just going to go around my screen. First of all, let me say to this group, thank you so much for carving this hour out of your schedules. And I'm going to say this again at the end of the program. Thank you as well for what you do when you're not in an hour in conversation with me and one another, because I know what you do day in and day out and the differences you make in this community. So I appreciate the fact that you're spending time with me tonight. It honors me, and I think it honors the community. So here's who you're looking at, Longmont. Harold Dominguez, our city manager, the CEO of Longmont, and has been in that role since 2012. Jessica Erickson. Jessica is the executive director, Jessica, right term, president and CEO of the Longmont Economic Development Partnership. You might recognize Jessica from our last conversation when the topic was rediscovering our soul in the development of our land and our economy. And if anybody's watching tonight that didn't watch that program, if you didn't and you'd like to hear a conversation about development that you will never hear again, or probably never heard before, to hear developers talk about soulful development, what they bring, and how what they develop reflects their highest values. It was a pretty extraordinary conversation. I know tonight's going to be equally as interesting. Stacy Cornet Stacy, is it fair to say you're the founder and CEO of Communication Concepts?
That's correct.
All right, and the immediate past chair of the Longmont Economic Development Partnership Board of Directors.
That's also correct.
Eric Wallace is founder and CEO of Left Hand Brewery. Eric is the current chair of the Longmont Economic Development Partnership. And Doug Alenowitz is a founder, co-founder, and principal of Trailbreak Development, Trailbreak Partners. So that's our group tonight. Everybody has a lot to contribute to this conversation, but Jessica, I want to start with you. The term new localism, I didn't invent, right? It wasn't conjured up for this conversation tonight.
Yeah.
There's some pretty rigorous thinking and scholarship behind the concept.
Yeah.
But for a lot of folks, not the folks in this conversation, but for the folks in town who might be watching this, it'll be a new term and is worthy of some explanation. Where did it come from? Why is it important to you? Why is it so much part of the vernacular for you and for some of the others who we'll hear from tonight?
Thank you. And thank you for having me tonight. And thank you for having this conversation. I love this conversation. The idea or the concept of new localism really came out of the Brookings Institute and a former Brookings Institute scholar, Bruce Katz, who founded the Metropolitan Policy Program at the Brookings Institute that still exists today, though he's no longer there. And his original book, Metropolitan Revolution, kind of delved into this idea of problem solving or solving the kind of world's greatest problems at the local and regional level, and provided some examples throughout that, and then really took a deeper dive with his book that he co-authored with Jeremy Nowak titled The New Localism, which is really this idea that innovative, transformational problem solving. So the innovation that's going to solve the world's greatest challenges, whether they be economic, education, poverty, affordable housing, all of the things that are pressing challenges for all of us across the globe, are really going to come from the local level. And even more than that, they're not going to come from the public sector alone. So the public sector alone is not going to solve the affordable housing crisis. It's not going to solve the childcare crisis. It's not going to solve talent shortage or workforce development issues that we have across this country. It is going to require networks of leaders from institutions across the public, private, nonprofit, and education sectors. And again, coming from the top down, the local level, to solve those problems, and solve those problems at a systemic level. So not some of the band-aids, the policy band-aids that we've seen applied to those issues recently, but really solutions that are innovative and creative and rooted in systems.
That sounds like some serious redefining of the whole responsibility of government. Eric, because I've had a chance to sit in on some of the meetings you chaired at the Longmont Economic Development Partnership, I know how you are animated around these ideas, the value you've placed on them, what they mean for you as a business leader, and what you think they mean for the community. So I want to give you a chance to talk about, why do you care about this? Why would Left Hand care about this? Why would your colleagues, and why should Longmont care about the things we just heard from Jessica?
Well, as an Air Force brat and an Air Force vet that moved all around the world frequently, until I moved to Longmont, I didn't have a hometown. And I've declared publicly, Longmont is my hometown, though I was not born here. I've lived all over the place. And since it's my hometown, I want my hometown to be the best hometown it can be. And when I first moved here 28 years ago, there was kind of a readily visible kind of inferiority complex in Longmont, because we sit at the other end of the diagonal from Boulder. And I was always curious as to why that existed, and never really bought into it. And basically, even 25 years ago, said, we got to do something about this. That's a very poor attitude. We were the first brewery in town. We started Left Hand to solve a societal problem, which was there wasn't very much good beer out there. And we're wired, apparently, we're fairly. We've been innovative in the beer industry, and we've seen how an operating business can be a really positive influence and factor in its community. And we went from where there was 3 of us working to where now there's 111 of us working. And so issues within a city and things and challenges and projects become more apparent to you as your people are all being impacted. And as my 3 kids who were born and schooled and raised and live in Longmont are being impacted. So those problems become more evident, as you have more touch points. And building a multi-generationally sustainable community is really what I'm all about. The affordability of housing right now is like one of my biggest issues that I'm really starting to bang the drum on, because my own daughter who works at the brewery can't afford to live in Longmont. Over half of our people drive in from other communities. And I think that there are solutions available to us, but we have to break down the boxes that limit our thinking. The leadership of the city has to be more creative. We've got to kill some sacred cows, and we've got to solve some problems. And that's why I'm so energized about this. And let me just lay a clear example tied to affordability. When my people can't afford to live in town, or they can't be building equity in town because they can't get their foot in the door, they live farther away. The farther away they live, the farther they have to drive to get to work. The farther they have to drive, there is a direct correlation between someone's tenure in the brewery and the distance that they're commuting to get here every day. And when I hear of solutions that we're going to stop growing in order to solve all of the societal ills and traffic and climate change, we're basically going in the opposite direction. The farther someone has to live, the farther they have to drive, the less effective my workforce is, the more I'm training new people, the more churn I have, the less profitable I am, the less I can reinvest in community, the more cars are driving, the more aggravated everyone is, the more pollution there is. The solution is to come up with the answers to have our workforce living as close as possible to where they work, to where the transit is, to where the amenities are, and build a healthy community. I mean, we are basically got our, and I'm sorry, I'm going to be so direct. We got our heads in the sand on how to solve this thing, and we've got to break out of the old ways of thinking, and we've got to open some new gates in how to get there.
I was hoping you would be candid tonight.
Well, it's hard for me to not.
I appreciate the candor and I appreciate the passion. And if I was going to digress, I would say, and Jessica, would you like to add the importance of childcare to what he just said about housing? But I won't do that to you just now. And by the way, I wanted to ask you all to share with one another, with the community, as you hear things you'd like to weigh in on. Don't wait for me to ask a question or call on you. Just weigh in. But I am going to ask Stacy here. Before I do, I want to remind anybody who's viewing that 40 minutes into the hour, we'll take calls. So if you want to add to our thinking, you want to help us learn our way forward in terms of what are the problems we're solving and what should we be thinking about in terms of solving them, you get a chance to participate in this conversation as well. So we have somebody who's helping to manage this program, and they'll put a phone number up and you can call in, go in a waiting room and join the conversation. So Stacy, right now I want you to join the conversation.
Okay, great.
Both as the past chair and with the work you do every day with leaders in town. How do you translate this for yourself and for others? You're a small business owner, but you're working with leaders, business of all sizes in every segment of the community. How do you translate all this into your work and what it means long-term for Longmont?
Well, I have to back it up a little bit, Tim, and thank you so much for inviting me to participate in this. This is one of my favorite topics, and I didn't know for most of my life that there was a name for this. I've been doing this, as I found out, for years without even knowing that there was a model about it. It's just the way I have always functioned. In fact, if I may, I want to show my book that I got that Jessica referenced. And I want to note that it's signed by Bruce Katz and it says, Communicate New Localism. So Bruce, I'm doing that. I'm working on that.
Good.
So I think it's vitally important that we talk about this, whatever it's called. And I'm glad that Longmont has embraced this notion. I've just intuitively operated for many years, and I'm nodding with a lot of what Eric said. I came here 31 years ago, started looking around and thought, this is a great place. What's going on? Why isn't more happening? I think when we convene, I think new localism is a lot about convening and finding out what is it that we want to accomplish in this community. Are there problems? Are there opportunities? Are there things that are holding us back? And if we want to move from A to B, how do we get there? And the new localism talks a lot about you get the right people to the table. You talk about it and you find out, well, what could we do or what could be different and who's not at this table? And I think that's fundamental to new localism. Who's not at that table that needs to be at that table? Who are they? And we talk a lot about the unrepresented, but it's specific people in different instances, depending on what you're trying to accomplish. So it's more than just being inclusionary, which is important, of course, but it's being intentional in what kind of expertise and what kind of passion and who comes so that you have the right people who can make a difference, the people with the city, with the school district, with the county, the business leaders, education, hospitals, whatever it needs to be, you need to talk to them and we need to talk about it. And I think one of the times that I think about as an example of how this has worked for Longmont that was so clear to me and before I knew what the name was when the business community decided to get together years ago and come up with an economic plan for the entire community so that people wouldn't, each group is doing all kinds of different things and we have lots of different organizations doing lots of really great things. And we sat down and had months after month after month of hard meetings looking at what is economic development? What do we want to accomplish? What does it need to look like? And that, I mean, Jessica could talk about that, I'm sure, all day for us. And I find it fascinating. But what ended up happening was all of the different groups that have something to do with it came together and collectively said, this is our part, this is your part, this is our goal, this is our intention. And we've updated that plan recently. And so it's really made a difference. And I don't want to speak for Jessica, but I think that that's one of the main reasons we were able to hire Jessica here to Longmont, because she saw that plan and appreciated that. Is that true, Jessica?
She's trying to unmute.
It is.
Okay, I thought it was, and then I thought, I must have said something way wrong.
No, it absolutely is the original Advanced Longmont strategy. So I just drunk the Metropolitan Revolution, Metropolitan Policy Program Kool-Aid when I was at the governor's office in the Hickenlooper administration, and had met Amy Liu and had decided that was my primary motivation to start looking at, getting back to doing economic development at the local level, because that was, it was very apparent to me, even back then, 6 years ago now, that change was happening at the local level. And especially back then, because, 6 years ago, there weren't federal resources like we're about to see coming from ARPA to even support that. So not only from a innovative, creative, policy-making perspective, were problems going to have to be solved at the local level, but also from a fiscal perspective, they were going to have to be solved at the local level because there wasn't support from the state and local government, or from the state and federal governments to make those things happen. And so I serendipitously got a call about this job opening in Longmont, and looked into the original Advanced Longmont strategy. And it was as close as I had seen to kind of that ideology around collaboration as economic development. And now we've taken that even further with our collective impact model for economic development. So going beyond collaboration and aligning all of our private, nonprofit, and civic institutions around the same vision of what we want our community to look like, specifically from an economic and prosperity perspective.
Harold, everything we've heard so far, and the concepts, right, the theories, the frameworks that are codified or captured in the new localism, have huge implications for municipalities. I mean, in a lot of ways, municipalities is where the action is, right? And the whole frame for this series of programs, in terms of the future we deserve, is to be looking at what should we be anticipating, and what are the implications for what we're anticipating, and how we realize our best hopes coming out of the pandemic into the post-pandemic future. From the CEO perspective of the city, the municipality, what does all this mean to you, and what are the implications for the city, for you, your team, for those who make policy, for those who implement policy, for those who are responsible for outreach, for listening, and putting it all together?
Yeah, it's interesting, when this topic came up, you actually took me back to my days as an undergrad and then ultimately in graduate school, because what's interesting, I think new localism is sort of, and you'll hear me talk about devolution in a little bit, but it's really an evolution. And there was a book written in 1992 by Osborne and Gabler called Reinventing Government. And when you look at the principles in Osborne and Gabler and Reinventing Government, you see the same concepts that were brought forward in new localism. New localism did a better job of bringing into the entire community into the conversation, versus where Reinventing Government was just how do we get better at doing what we're doing, steer, not row, empower rather than serve, inject competition into service delivery. You can see some of those concepts from Reinventing Government in New Localism, but Reinventing Government, and I remember being in a session with the Lieutenant Governor when he was starting to talk about the devolution and what that was meaning for communities. This was really on the front end of my career. And so what has happened really since the 80s is that what you find and what we have found and what we have to deal with is many of the issues that were being dealt with and supported at the federal and state levels have continued to be pushed down onto local governments. And so local governments are now faced with the challenge of fully absorbing and dealing with societal issues. And you can go into things like mental health, substance abuse, childcare, economic development. You hear a lot of states playing in this world, but economic development, I will argue, has always been and will be best be done by local governments because we can work within our community, but that was pushed down to us. And when you look at New Localism, it talks about the new locus of power is new localism, and it's emerging by necessity to solve grand challenges, characteristics of modern societies, economic competitiveness, social inclusion and opportunity, renewed public life, challenge of diversity. Those are all of the things that we struggle with as a city. And when you look at a lot of these problems, cities have been trying to deal with these for hundreds of years. And we're still trying to deal with those issues. And I think for us, it really is, how do we come together as a community? And in community, I mean our residents, our businesses, our entrepreneurs, how do we come together as a collective to tackle these really large monumental issues so that we can make a positive difference in our community? And in that, how do we get creative and looking at different solutions? And I think for us, Stacy brought up Advanced Longmont 1.0. I remember when we got into it, engaging in that conversation, that first engagement piece was very difficult because it was new and it was different. But it really sets the stage for these broader conversations. And for us, I think what it means is we have to be, and we have a lot of work to do on this. I think we do really well in areas. I think other areas we don't do as well. But we have to really engage and look at this, and that it's going to take all of us to do it. And how do we create the partnerships? And this is where I go back to Reinventing Government, steer, not row. How do we engage multiple people to be solution oriented, to really work to solve the challenges that have been plaguing cities for hundreds of years? Because cities can't do it. We've tried, cities have tried and tried and tried. We can't do it alone. And it really takes all of us. And so I think it takes on our side almost a flip of a switch and how we think and how we approach things, trying to be solution oriented. I think, the challenge that cities face in this is also embedded in our very structure of government. And it's the issues that we have in play, whether the federal rules, state rules, local ordinance, and all of these issues. And at times, the issue of new localism, reinventing government, when I started in my career, there is a pinch point there. And in that pinch point, how do we move through that discussion when at times you have these rules that are overlaying that's creating challenges to it? And how do we have the open conversation to bring everyone in the community together to say, here's what we're trying to solve collectively, but here's how we need to also look at potentially adjusting some things so we can solve it collectively? Because I think that's a challenge that's any city USA that we go through. And I've seen it in every city I've worked in.
So some of the pinch points or the regulatory challenges, I think that would be from federal and state levels created somewhere else. So we have the responsibility for a solution without all the authority.
Correct.
To modify what the constraints might be. Is that a correct interpretation of what you just said?
Yeah, that's correct. But I think we also have it where we do it to ourselves too.
Yeah. Well, I have no doubt.
And all of those things come together because it then becomes in the weaving in this that sometimes you just hit roadblocks, and it's how you get through that roadblock.
So here's what I want to do. I'm going to ask Doug now to weigh in, and I'm going to ask Jessica, Eric, and Stacy in particular, but Harold, you as well. Doug, 3 years ago, started the process of getting permitted to develop housing, the very housing, actually not so far from Left Hand Brewery, but the very kind of housing I think Eric was talking about his employees, his daughter and his employees need. Workforce housing, right? Not acreage and executive housing. Is that fair, Doug? Is that kind of your sweet spot in terms of as a developer and home builder?
Yes, yeah, that's accurate. Yep.
So for 3 years, your project has been reviewed and reviewed and reviewed, right? And part of the reason I wanted Doug to be in this conversation, and Harold and Doug have been in this conversation together, is because I think Doug's project is an example of what we have, something, it's one we need to learn from. And I want Doug, if you would be able to share, not as you talk about your experience, but what you think we ought to learn. And then how we get better, what does it look like to get better at this going forward? Because I think what I've heard from Eric and from Harold, and certainly from Jessica and Stacy, is that we need to refine, and we need to accelerate decision making in the interest of better decisions, right? For pretty clear objectives or purposes.
Tim, can I jump in? Just,
yeah.
I think you're nailing the point that I'm also making notes, is that the city has approved strategic vision and also talked about flexibility, innovation, and changing, modifying rules and restraints to progress. New localism requires us to all get on the same page. I think that we're somewhere in the process of trying to get on the same page, and we're not all on the same page. And that's the challenge for all of us that play different roles in this, to all be communicating and pull more in a common direction, to where I've heard the words collaboration, I've heard the words solution oriented. That is the mindset that we really require. And from the top all the way down, we've got to get away from making partisan points, and we have to talk about solutions for the people that live in a real town with real issues.
So when I said you are animated about this, you're animated about this, and I love it. So Eric, I want you to be thinking along with Jessica and Stacy as we asked Doug to kind of unpack this. What the idea of competency in the practices of new localism, right? What would his experience look like if we were nailing it moving forward, right? Because we haven't nailed it yet for Doug. And I'm gonna shut up and let you talk about your experience, Doug. But I would like you three to be listening for what are the kinds of competencies that we ought to be nailing, so that we help guys like Doug deliver the product that we said we wanted him to deliver, which is what he intended to do. And part of Eric's point is he hasn't done it, and I think Harold would agree with this. We've done it to ourselves in terms of how this got hung up. So, Doug, just describe the experience. And I don't know where you are in the trajectory, or how close you are to getting finished. But some of the challenges, if we don't get it right, and what those costs are, because there are serious costs associated with how we've been doing it.
Well, a couple things. One, thank you for having me. I appreciate the opportunity to chat about a delicate area.
Yeah.
I would say a couple of things. One is, the fact that this conversation is taking place is really indicative of what I would say is that change is, an awareness of it, and a desire to improve upon kind of where things are currently. It feels like it really is underway. And, Harold and his team, I'm grateful for that, from the seat that I sit in. It's easy to Monday morning quarterback and say, gee, that would have been great to be there, a couple years ago or whatever. But, I'm a realist about process and how things change. Our experience with Longmont in many respects has been quite positive. But we, as you've talked about, we've had some challenges along the way. And, I think my comments are really, how to shed light on those challenges in with the idea of, processing new development and, things that, recommendations we might have for, working between the private sector on the development side and the, city and, both electeds and, when it gets down to the staff. Because I think that's really where disconnects happen. And it's not unique to Longmont, let's be clear about that. So, in our particular case, we think it's a pretty good project. It was, well received. By the time we took it through Planning Commission in 2019, even some of the initial opposition, it was on board and, said so out loud at, in a public hearing and kind of got approved, and things started to go off the rail after that. And, it's common right now that in the current times where there's a disconnect between what I would call the policy outcomes and the aspirations that a city puts forward from, hey, we want this type of housing or this type of development to take place. And, that, and then what the current standards allow for. And that's where things start to go awry. And the reason for that is, that the type of development, the nature of development, the standards that were put in place, many of them are quite dated. And it's easy to invent a picture of what we want to see there, but, allowing code to catch up is easier said than done. And so, oftentimes cities are advocating for, sustainable solutions, but they're unachievable without variances or exceptions. And the notion of an exception or a variance when you walk in the door is met with skepticism, right? And then even if it wasn't just skepticism, it necessarily puts it in the realm of discretion. And when you have discretion, right, now you're picking winners and losers. And so the reason I'm going down this path, and it's not unique to Longmont, this is just kind of from where we sit as in the development community and the investment community, is when you have discretion in uncertainty and it takes longer and it's harder to get to an outcome that might not be achievable, well, that's called risk. And risk gets priced into projects. And that's not somebody sitting here being, hey, I'm an evil, greedy developer or whatever, that the caricature may be. It's, when we go out and, seek investors, which can be, local residents that are, doing that instead of buying stock or their 401k, they're going to say, well, gee, that's kind of a risky proposition. The more risk there is, the higher the expected rate of return, and it sort of waterfalls down from there. And, there's a view that development, you can just wave a magic wand and development, pays for everything and solves everything. And, I think Harold really commented on two things. In my view, there's a need for collaboration. There's a need for a solutions-oriented attitude, right? And we have endemic, and it's not new, right? All the current leadership in cities inherited this paradigm that's existed for centuries, which is a regulatory mindset, an enforcement mindset. And I would say that in today's day and age, where there's a lot of competing interests, right? We want to have this outcome, but we need access to housing. We need housing that's affordable, but we have crumbling infrastructure. Well, then development should just go pay for all of it. Well, if we pay for all of it, prices go up. Well, those don't work together. There's all these competing interests. And my experience has been when you can get to the point where all of the parties around the table are on the same team, whether you're the city, whether you're staff, whether you're the developer or whoever all those parties are, and you have a common objective in terms of what the outcome is, it's a lot easier to say, let's work together and Harold, to your comments, solution oriented. We know where we're trying to get to. Nobody's asking for a free walk, but a real honest conversation about the competing interests, and everything can't just be thrown in one direction. And then, there is a balancing act. I absolutely agree. There needs to be a sense of urgency on all parties to be able to get there. I think it needs to be thoughtful. We don't just want things rubber stamped that creates, long-term issues for cities, for residents, for communities. But there is a lot of analysis paralysis that happens within cities and with staff. So I think it's, we need to be collaborative bridge builders. The parties to that project really should be working with that common shared vision of where we're trying to get to. I think it is a fundamental cultural attitude in an organization that needs to be worked on. And so, Eric, you had talked about this coming from the top down. I absolutely agree with that, right? There's this endemic attitude of enforcement or a lack of incentive, either a lack of incentive or no incentive, or risk in somebody bringing solutions to the table. If you're staff, right, when you have a code book, it's really safe to stay within the the confines of that. That's culture. It comes from leadership. So leadership needs to set that standard, set the expectation, and live it every single day, so that staff can see it and it's a safe environment to be able to do what needs to be done to align these areas where we just have, aspirations over here that everybody feels really good about, and then, code or process or the historical paradigm kind of holding things back.
Yeah. Oh, sorry.
There's a lot of work to do. There's a lot of work to do on that last part of that. Harold, what are your thoughts? Because you're trying to figure this out day in real time, day in and day out. And then both for the other three, the competencies and what's at stake if we don't get it right in the post-pandemic future, because we're competing with cities that will, right? But pick it up, Harold, in terms of what are we learning and what do we need to learn? What else do we need to learn and apply going forward?
Yeah, I think what we need to learn and what we're talking to folks is, I had a conversation last week, and when we're autopsying things, and I used the comment, how we don't need to be problem identifiers. Yes, we need to identify the issues, but then to the point of how can we become problem solvers? And it's in that. I think, you heard me talk about the tension. And the tension that starts coming into play in different worlds, and it really depends on what the issue is. So if you get into things like floodplain issues and water quality issues, the reality in that system is we are given the authority to manage and issue those permits by the state and the federal government, and we get audited on how we do it. And so that process in its own right becomes very complicated just because of that oversight from these other governmental entities, which creates an interesting tension point in how we move through it. I still think there's room to have conversations, but there are points in the conversation where you don't have room. And so it's not like you have complete flexibility. You have sideboards that statutorily are placed on you. It's a little bit different than when you get more into your local codes and how you move through that. And, like one of the things we talked about that seems simple enough, but in cases where you send someone through the planning process first, we're thinking we probably in certain areas of the community where we know these difficult points are going to come up, they probably need to have the stormwater or the floodplain and the water quality issue first before you start running through other processes, because that's not completely in our control. And so I think there's, to Doug's point, there's process pieces that I think we need to talk about and really adjust, because what should come first. And in that, the other thing I talked about with staff is we also have to clearly let people know what our expectations are. Because if you're not clear on what your expectations are and what your parameters are, it does tend to lead to being able to move into a spin cycle pretty quickly. And so those are things that I'm trying to work on with folks. And then as you get closer in, and I'm going to say again, any city USA, working in 3 different cities, each had their own characteristics, their own rules, their own ordinances, and all of these things in place. And then it comes into this world of the tensions even within those, and what can you do and what can't you do. You know, I ran into an interesting, and council brought this to my, council asked us to bring this back, but an individual wanted to do this and was looking at a particular section of an ordinance. And even though they were complying with what the ordinance wanted them to do, they were actually exceeding what the ordinance wanted them to do. The ordinance didn't allow us to use that mechanism because it was, if you can't meet it, here's what you can do. And you get into these oddities in it that in some ways starts closing down the what you can do, and it shows itself at different points. And so I think what I'm talking to staff about is, the points I've said: identify the problem, try to be a problem solver, understand what we're looking at, why we're looking at it, clearly outline what our expectations are and what we need to do. And then on the front end, identify the landmines. Because if you know a landmine, don't wait till you're farther in the process to identify it. Identify it on the front end, because then people can maneuver and make adjustments. And I'm actually learning that on a different side now that we've taken over the housing authority, because now I am in the game and the discussion we're talking about, and really experiencing some of those issues, which has really afforded me a different opportunity to look at it, because now I can look at it both from, the regulatory approval side, but also on the other side of trying to get a project forward. And that's been really eye-opening. And I think more cities, I think that's a benefit to start bringing in that lens, because it gives you a different look at it, where you can truly start, targeting things that you can control. The things that I can't control, there needs to be other conversations, but what can I adjust and that I can control to try to help in really, embrace the new localism and what we can do.
So we've heard from Doug, heard from Harold. What did the three experts here on the new localism, what are you hearing about, or from this experience about practices that we need to be clear on, that we need to refine, that we need to execute very competently, because others will, and the others are those with whom we're competing.
Could I jump in?
Oh, go ahead. Sorry.
Oh, I can't see everybody, so go ahead, Jessica.
No, go ahead.
Come on, you're being too polite.
Okay. Okay. What I wanted to say before I forgot, it is in terms, and I don't know if it's addressed specifically in the book. I admit I haven't read every page of the book, but I think sometimes we forget that what we want to accomplish still goes back to basic courtesy and the competencies that I think that we as a nation, but particularly we're talking as a community, we're going to have to get a lot better. I'm a professional communicator. We're going to have to get a lot better at communication two-way, so that we are not just putting out and communicating at people, which happens all the time, listening for what we're going to say, but listening for understanding, because that's where we find out a lot of times where there are problems or opportunities, is just through communicating with people about their experiences and what they need or what they've seen. The big work that I've seen in 30 years in this community has happened in that way. And something that we've all kind of said, but I don't know that it's been said outright, is you have to trust each other. If you're going to do this kind of work, you got to trust each other. And Harold alluded to, when we started doing Advanced Longmont 1.0 or whatever it was called, it wasn't easy. And there were some hard words, and there were some people who were getting upset, and there were turf battles in there, but there was the passion to keep going and the understanding that we could get there, and we needed to trust each other. And that means telling it like we see it, even if it's different than other people. And Eric talks about getting on the same page. And I totally agree. That's what the whole thing is about. But so often we come to the table, I know how it should be. I'm on the page. Where are the rest of you? And the beauty of this to me is that there isn't necessarily the beginning with a page. It's coming together collectively to decide what is our page and how are we going to move forward. And I say, and I'll turn it over to everybody else, but I want to say it's urgent. It's urgent now. It's urgent for this community. It's urgent for our nation that we get so that we can communicate with each other, not judge each other, and learn how to trust, because we can always find things that we can agree on. So let's work on those.
All right, let's talk about what is it.
Thanks.
What is it? Thank you, Stacy. Let's talk
Oh,
about.
can I jump in? I think what Stacy's hitting on is the piece in the book where, I mean, they're specific to say with rising populism on both sides of the conversation, they really see new localism as that mechanism to kind of bridge. And I think it's really a bridge for the, civil discourse and how we decide, what do we want to be?
Yeah, I'd like to put a participant hat on here as opposed to a moderator hat on, but I'm going to resist because I'd love to weigh in right there. Jessica, Eric, what are you hearing about competencies, about what matters here?
Jessica, go first, because I've got a list here too. Go.
Yeah, I don't have a list, so I'll be relatively quick, but I just want to go kind of reinforce specific to Doug's project, to Trailbreak Partners project. So I had the good fortune of meeting Doug 3 years ago when he had first come into the community, and he came to me and to others within the community, and I'm sure you, Tim, and probably had the same experience with him. He came to us with a solution for a stated problem, or a way for us, a product to help us achieve a specific stated goal of our community, which was housing attainable to the greatest percentage of our workforce that's earning that 80 to 120% AMI. Others might call it workforce housing. And so we had identified that as a problem. We had identified solving that problem as a goal. And here we had somebody who was coming to our community, understanding that, having evaluated that, assessed that, having understood that about our community, and saying, I want to help you solve this problem. And yes, I'm a developer. I'm going to make money off of it. That's my job. But I very specifically think that I have a proven solution to your stated problem and your stated goal. And I think, to Stacy's point, if we can't find a way to, when that happens, when we're fortunate enough to have that happen, and we're fortunate enough to have someone like Doug, an entity like Trailbreak Partners, invest in our community, if we can't find a way to trust that that's authentic and that's real, instead of applying these kind of outdated ideas of what the developer is. I always say people imagine all developers are sleeping on beds of money every night. And I'm sure Doug can confirm that that's not the case. But if we can't find a way to trust when somebody comes to us wanting to invest in our community and bring us a proven solution, so not the first place he's done this, bring us a proven solution to a problem that we've said that we need to solve, then and unanimously approved by P&Z, as he said, supported by neighbors that had originally challenged that. If we can't find a way to trust that, then again, to Stacy's point and to Harold's point about trust and communication, then we might as well just kind of stop today if we can't figure out a way to do that.
So I don't know if I would categorize it as a competency, but as a willingness to accept yes for an answer. Mm-hmm. I mean, what you described is spot on. And some communities are going to recognize when there is an answer and be able to say yes to it more quickly than others. And it's going to be a difference maker, a game changer from one community to the next. Eric, what did you want to weigh in on?
Doug brought up culture. Several times we've heard the word collaboration, and I've talked to Harold about we need the system, the process to be collaborative. They're the experts and they see where the blocks are. Collaboration, solution oriented. Those are, I fully agree. I just want to re-echo that for the third or fourth time. And then goal setting based on data. let's quantify the size of the issue, and then let's tell all of our people, this is the goal, people, get on the boat. We need to get there. And if you see a problem that is stopping Doug from solving our problem, let's solve the block to Doug's problem so he can help us solve our strategic problem. What are the results if we fail at this? The second part of your question is workforce availability is already a challenge, and it's getting harder and harder. And when I've got people driving in from Fort Collins and Denver and Loveland and Berthoud and Johnstown and Platteville and all over Kingdom Come, they don't spend as much time, they don't last as long. They leave more quickly because they find a job closer. Quality of life goes down when you're driving all of the time. When everyone that works in Boulder lives in Longmont, when everyone that lives in Longmont lives somewhere else, quality of life goes down. Climate change is impacted. Traffic is exacerbated. So all of these things in my mind, we have a strategic vision. Now we need to impart the vision, as Doug said, the permission really to solve these issues within the process and determine where the conflicts are. There's plenty of conflicts, and we can talk all day about where the conflicts in our guidance lives, because we all run into them. The city's the expert. Help us solve them and help enact the strategic goals and visions of Envision Longmont and Advanced Longmont 2.0, approved by City Council as our stated goal, policy, and vision. Help us get there. That's what we're talking about.
Why should anybody who is not listening to this watch it when it's in the recorded version, or anybody who is watching it? Why should they care? They're settled. They've got their jobs. They've got a home. What does it matter to the average citizen? And we've got just a few minutes left to hit the highlights of this.
Where are your kids going to work? Where are your kids going to live? Are you going to pass down a bunch of money to them, or are they going to have to go out and earn it, and they're going to live somewhere else? You know, what's the next 30 years look like? Is Longmont going to empty shell itself out of existence because it's become so expensive that you're going to have East Coast, West Coast money living here, and we're going to look like Boulder?
You know, Tim, I think part of it, and I've talked to council about this in terms of budgeting and what we're looking at in the future. And I think you break down, you know, when you look at what makes Longmont great, our diversity, and when I say diversity, I'm talking economic diversity, racial diversity. All of those issues are really characteristics that makes Longmont great. You know, when we look at what do we have available to develop, there's not, you know, you're now hearing us talk about build out. And what does that mean as we're approaching build out? We also know that cities are also pushed financially. We face the same inflationary pressures that Eric faces in his business, and we have to absorb that. And as we continue to move forward, you know, it is important for us to look at these things, because you also have to understand the financial model that cities are built on. And it's really growth and new revenue. And if you get to the point to where that doesn't continue to exist, you can look to cities where it's happening. It either becomes incredibly expensive to live because you're constantly having to hit larger rate increases because you don't have the growth coming in. And I'm not saying it's the only answer, but you see those cities then tend to push sales tax higher, property tax higher, and those issues because they're limited in their revenue resources that come in. And then what you see from a social equity perspective is you see the other side of it starting to come into play. And so I think that's where you have to look 10, 15, 20 years down the road to go, what's coming at us in this? Because it's coming. And then when you look at what's available to develop, I mean, there's a reason many of these properties weren't developed right away. They're the hardest to develop for any number of reasons. And so that comes into play as well. So it really also is looking at the long-term financial viability of the community, but also preserving the character of the community as it exists today, because those two work hand in hand.
Could I just add real quick that I agree with all of that. And we've talked a lot about development. That is a big deal. I've spent a lot of my time trying to help with these efforts too, because it's so important. But the question about why should other people care who may see this or hear about it? People should care because this is not a top-down deal. This is your deal, Longmont. If you work here, you live here, you have an interest here, then you have ideas and you have solutions and you see opportunities. And to me, at its very core, that's what it's about. I hate the word empower, but it really empowers everyone to take ownership and not have to say, well, I'm not an elected official, or I don't work for the city, or I don't work for the school district, or what have you. No, but you're valuable. You have very valuable information about this community that we all need. And that's the beauty of it to me, is because it isn't just a separate group of people deciding things. It morphs over time in different ways with different people. So I would say you want to get involved because of the future, we've all said, but you might just find you like it. And you might just find that you can make a difference with what you know.
Well, I hope that this conversation gets repeated and amplified in the orbits in which you live and work, right? I hope if however many Longmonters watch this program, I hope it stimulates some other conversations about what's at stake. And fundamentally, the word trust now has come up several times. In the very first of these programs, when we were talking about redefining the roles and responsibilities of government, and it was followed by truth and truth-telling and equity and justice and recovery and the common good, what is it, and on and on. We've kind of danced around that idea that so much that there's a book that's entitled "The Speed of Trust." That if we could find a way to reconnect the population with government in ways that you've described tonight, as a partnership to accelerate the kinds of decisions that need to be made and improve the quality of them. The future, I think, lies to the municipalities that can do that. So I hope in some ways these conversations contribute to, I don't know that if we have to reestablish trust, but it's certainly to strengthen the trust both of the Longmont's government, of its population, of the residents, and the other way around. I don't know. I think the municipalities should get that right, win in the long run. Is that fair? All right. I'm gonna do a wrap up here. I can't tell you how much fun these have been for me. It's been a real honor. I'm just a privilege to be in these conversations with people like you. And this is probably the only time this community will ever have a chance to hear this combination of people on this topic. So I hope people take advantage of it, if not in the live program tonight, when it's replayed. So thanks for tonight. Again, thanks for everything you do. I want to say to those who may be watching, this is the final episode of the Future We Deserve. And so everybody who's been kind enough to participate in these conversations, I want to thank you as well. The premise for this whole series was and remains that if we expect to see our national discourse improved, elevated, become more civil, more gracious, more informed, we need to expect that only because we've set the example at the local level. So that's what we tried to do with this series of 10 sessions on the Future We Deserve, to model what adult, intellectually rigorous, substantive conversations look like, and not just reiterate and amplify our worst fears about the future, but to amplify the best hopes of Longmont leaders, Longmont residents, about your aspirations and your best hopes for the future we deserve, right? So we're coming out of a pandemic. Some have suggested that we've got almost like a portal to the future. The potential for us today is really to set ambitious, meaningful goals and achieve them, but only if we can do the things that you've described tonight. Find a way to take advantage of all the talent, all the input, all the intellect, all the capacity in Longmont. So I know that's what you're going to do. Personally, as a resident, I'm gonna stand with you in that effort. Thanks to you tonight. to Longmonters, thanks for those of you who have watched this and joined the party. There's a lot of work to do. Thanks. And thanks to you. We're done. Man, I wish we had another hour or two. Yeah, we didn't even get it. You know, Harold, when you mentioned populism,